What's up, everybody? Tim here. In this video, I'm going to walk you through a simpler approach to balance out your plate so you can consistently hit meals that are healthy, nutritious, and that are also ones that you enjoy. Before I move forward with that, though, let me explain a little bit more about some of the things that are going to be coming your way. So if you have been granted a link to this video, probably in the email that this came in, you are part of the exclusive group of people that I've had the opportunity to either work with or have currently working with or have worked with in the past. And what I'm going to be doing is sending that exclusive group of people specific video lessons, specific resources, guides, checklists, um, that are going to help you throughout the days and weeks that maybe you and I are not seeing each other, or in between your training sessions with me here in the gym. And what I realized over the past year and a half of working with either yourself or other people in this group at some point is a lot of the questions that people ask are very common and very similar. So it made me realize, okay, if someone is having this, a lot of people are having the same issue as other people or someone else, maybe it's worth actually putting something together to help everybody. And that's the point of this. So ideally every Wednesday, you guys are going to be getting some kind of access to a exclusive coaching session, training, lecture, resource. I don't want to say lecture, it sounds too formal, but something that's going to be short and sweet, but it's also going to really be very helpful for you and provide you with kind of actionable items that you can take and utilize immediately. So that's the point of this. I want to make sure I say that so you guys have an idea of what's coming your way and you can be on the lookout for stuff in the future. So like I said, I don't exactly have a name for this kind of thing just yet. Coaching corner, coaching session, whatever it is, that might change. But the main idea is that it gives you something specific. And I want to go over what our specific goals are for today at the end of this training. So like I said, our main purpose for this specific video is going to be showing what a healthy and balanced meal looks like, going over how the meals can be distributed within the plate, what you could be and possibly should be aiming for. Also give you the best methods of starting out with and to go into a little bit more detail with some of the portion control methods that you and I may have talked about in the past. I want to provide examples so you guys know kind of how to, mix and match and how to make something out of nothing, especially if the days get really busy and you're limited in what your options are. And last thing, my main purpose and my main hope is that at the end of this, you will feel more confident in your ability to build a plate, look at a plate, and determine what's best for you. And just make this whole process of nutrition feel just a little bit easier so you can be more consistent throughout the week. So here's an example of what a balanced plate could look like. So you'll see the pie chart there. That pie chart is broken up into 4 categories or sections. We have our veggies, protein, fat, and starch, which can be considered carbohydrates. The bigger the section, the bigger the font, the more of that item we'd want on our plate. So for example, veggies are going to take up about just under half of the size of the plate. Protein is going to take up a third, and the remaining third is going to be broken down relatively evenly between fat and our starches or carbohydrates. On the drinks that you'll see there to the right, we're going to want to keep those on the lower calorie to 0 calories. Those sugary drinks and high calorie drinks can kind of add up quickly. So in order to control the amount of calories that you're taking in throughout the day, definitely would suggest kind of keeping those to the lower calorie or 0 calorie drinks. But if you need something, that maybe the little change up a little bit. Things like the flavored seltzers are a great option. Some of the lower calorie water flavors, or any of the diet drinks that exist out there. You'll also see fruit kind of on the side. And I think for a lot of people, fruit is going to be something that we kind of have in between these big meals, as snacks or maybe as, toppers to something like oatmeal or yogurt. But ultimately, I think the size of fruit, if you're having it for an actual meal, could probably be fit in with the starch. So, for example, we can that same section. So, for example, if we wanted to change this around, we could have veggies, protein, and instead of the starch section, we can have, the fruit. Maybe it's an apple or some berries. So I hope this give you an idea of how to build a plate together so that you can, better build something that's going to be healthy and nutritious with the food options that you have available. So obviously, everybody's going to have different preferences, different things that they like, and different things that they know works best for them. And this is how we can adjust some of these things. So across the board, um, general rule of thumb, the amount of veggies you eat and the amount of protein that you eat should be relatively consistent. And as you kind of can tell from these two pie charts here, again, these pie charts are, the plates that you're putting together and that you will be eating with. Those two don't change from the original one. They don't change from the balanced plate. Those are going to be two of the items here that should stay relatively consistent. The two that can change, however, based on people's preferences, what they like best, is going to be kind of adjusting the fat and the starch or carbohydrates that you're eating. So for someone who might have had great results on something like a ketogenic or a lower carb diet, might opt for something on the right, which is more higher fat. And all that you would do is you would adjust the amount of fat that you're putting on your plate to account for the amount of starch or carbohydrates that you're taking away. On the flip side, if you're someone who really doesn't do well with a lot of fat coming in, maybe you are exercising at a very high intensity in between the days, or you're someone who just typically does well when they have an adequate and a moderate amount of carbohydrates in the diet, you can adjust the other side to provide a little bit more carbohydrates in the form of the starch while taking away some of the fat. And this is something that I want to bring up because a lot of times when we're talking about, adding and taking in certain foods, if we want to make sure that our calories are staying relatively consistent to match whatever our goal is, if we take something or if we add something, we want to take something away. On the flip side, if we take some food item away, we might have more opportunity to add more. So in this case, if we take away more carbohydrates to make room for more. In this case, we want to take away some of the carbohydrates to make room for the fat that we're going to be adding because we do well on maybe a higher fat diet. And on the flip side, rather than just adding more carbs to that balanced plate, we want to add more carbs but take away some of the fat to reflect the kind of changing in the or the to reflect keeping the calories consistent for whatever our goal is. I hope at this point you now have a better understanding of how to distribute different foods on your plate so that it can be balanced across the board or better fit your dietary preferences. The next question that comes up a lot related to this is how much of each should I put on a plate? Obviously, if we have two different people with different goals, the total amount of food is going to be different. So just for clarity, when we're talking about, third of this and a third of that, you're not trying to completely fill the plate. Chances are, if the after you put the amount of food on your plate and you can see the surface and you can't see the surface of your plate because it's filled up with food, that might be a little bit too much. So one way we can help with kind of portioning these things out is going to be using the hand portion method. And I think if you're someone who either hates calorie counting, macro tracking, or is just starting out and just needs to start becoming more aware of the amount of food that they're having or you're having in the portions, this can be a really good way to start. So going from left to right, about a fist, the size of our fist is going to be one portion of vegetables. One palm can be one portion of protein. A cupped hand, so I'm trying to get this on the screen, something like that, can be about one portion of carbohydrates or some kind of starch. And then we have about the length of our thumb be a portion of fat, like butter, nuts, avocado, that sort of thing. So a lot of people who I brought this up with are sometimes a little confused about, the amount of grams and the size and the measurements of these types of things. So we put those kind of underneath each of those hand symbols to give you a better understanding. So about a fist of vegetables can give you anywhere from 2 to 5 grams of that beneficial fiber. Again, these are estimates, they're not exact. A palm of protein can be about anywhere from 20 to 30 grams of protein. A cupped hand of carbohydrates are going to be about 20 to 30 grams. And these are going to be cooked carbohydrates. The size is going to change when we cook rice because it takes in the water and grows in size. So this is going to be a cupped hand of cooked food. And then we have that portion of fat, which can be anywhere from 7 to 12 grams of fat, depending on the exact amount that you use. The other side of that underneath, you'll see the kind of measurements that we can use to kind of estimate what we're having. So again, a fist is going to be about 1 cup of those non-starchy vegetables, such as broccoli, Brussels sprouts, green beans. We have our protein, so that palm is going to be about 3 to 4 ounces or 85 to 115 grams of that protein source, whether it's fish, red meat, chicken. And we have about a cupped hand is going to be anywhere from about half a cup to maybe 2/3 of a cup of that cooked carbohydrate source. And then our last one is going to be about a length of our thumb being about 1 tablespoon for something like oil or a liquid. And then we have about maybe 14 grams of that fat source. What I really like about this kind of method is that it's simple to use. You can use it anywhere. And at the very least, it starts to provide you with a little bit of awareness. And if you are struggling with the portions and trying to figure out how much of each you should put, I think this is a great way to get started with just becoming more mindful of the amount of food that we're putting on the plate so that we can then learn how to adjust it over the course, of the weeks and days ahead. So at this point, we should have two things, a better understanding of how to divide up a plate. Again, if we're going for a balanced approach or if we're going for something that's higher carbohydrate, lower fat, lower carbohydrates, high fat. All three of those work. It's just a matter of what's going to help you be more consistent in the long run while being able to perform well with whatever your goals are. And then we're also now hopefully better to understand how we can start being more mindful when it comes to the portions using our hands as a guide to kind of get us a little bit more familiar with the amount of food that we're putting on the plate when we are trying to divide it up in that specific way for us. The next section, we're going to kind of go over quickly just what foods to choose. This should be might be very repetitive. It might serve as more of a reminder than new information, but it's always good to be reminded because it helps us become um, more likely to do something like this. Before we get into specific foods, a couple things, right? We talked about preferences. We have to consider, what is available to you. Do you have these types of things in your house? Do you have to get them? Do you have to maybe, do a frozen option instead of the fresh one? And also, what are you comfortable with cooking? Certain foods are definitely easier to cook than others. I'm not the greatest cook, but there are some things I'm more comfortable with cooking than others. So you want to make sure that you're starting to build plates and use food and use ways of doing so that you're going to be more comfortable with because then the chances are so much higher that you'll be able to consistently stick to them in the long run. We're trying to figure out what to eat, especially when it comes to those types of food items. I'm a big advocate of starting with protein. A lot of benefit can come with starting with protein when you're putting a plate together, and it sets up a good trajectory from the next decisions you want to make. If we're looking at high quality protein sources, I like to, prioritize things like fish, chicken, lean cuts of meat, possibly some ground turkey, ground chicken, tofu and tempeh as well, especially if you're more of a vegetarian, vegan, or plant-based type of eater, or you just want something different. But then for the breakfast in the morning, we can do things like eggs, cottage cheese, Greek yogurt. All of these things here have a very high amount of protein, especially for their calories and the other things that relative to the other things that are in there. And when it comes to our lunches and our dinners, I definitely would suggest picking things that are like mostly protein, such as the chicken, such as cuts of steak and fish, so that you can really maximize in your ability to get as much protein as you can for as little calories as possible. And this is not the only list. You can definitely expand from this, but these are a really good head start. So the saying that sticks out to me when it comes to vegetables is eat the rainbow, and I'm not talking about the Skittles candy. We're talking about having a wide variety of colorful vegetables. Kind of like you see in the image there, we have some green, some red, some yellow, different shades of green, orange, some purple, some white. So we want to make sure we're getting a wide variety of leafy greens such as spinach, kale, colorful veggies, bell peppers, carrots, celery, cucumbers, and then those kind of cruciferous veggies as well, such as broccoli, Brussels sprouts. Again, the vegetables can be eaten based upon, tolerances, based on preferences of what you have the taste for. But a good spectrum of vegetables is going to really help you check all the boxes from the vitamin and mineral standpoint, and really get a lot of the various and helpful plant kind of compounds and chemicals that also provide us with some antioxidant benefits that are just another added layer to helping us feel healthy and keeping our body feeling good throughout the entire day and for the days and weeks to come. Fruits are very similar to vegetables in the sense of, kind of eating a wide variety of different colors. Some of the favorites, one of my favorites that I eat, and that I recommend are things like blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, apples and oranges, bananas if you need something, that's quick or, a good pre-workout snack. But similar to the vegetables, having a wide variety of fruits gives you a wide spectrum of different vitamins and minerals, and beneficial elements that you can take in to keep your body, giving it as much healthful and healthy food as it needs, and that'll make it feel good throughout, each and every day. So looking at carbohydrates, for carbohydrates, we want to be as minimally processed and as minimally refined as we can. Opting for whole grains is going to be your best bet here. Whole grains or things like, so we can do things like rice, brown rice, basmati rice, jasmine rice, wild rice. For the most part, any rice is going to be very similar, especially when it's in its kind of whole, unprocessed form. If we're looking at types of breads, right, bread by itself is not necessarily good or bad, but we want to maybe opt for something more of that whole grain bread. So a common one that people love a lot is that Dave's Killer Bread. So that kind of dark brown bread contains a lot of whole wheat, whole grains, which are going to be helpful for us to get some of that fiber in. Other example carbohydrate sources, sweet potatoes and potatoes. This is a good example to differentiate between carbohydrates and starch, because we have a lot of these things can also be considered maybe vegetables, such as potatoes and sweet potatoes, but they're primarily used as a form of starch for us to eat, which is basically something that we will use to turn into sugar for our body to then use for energy and just to keep us moving throughout the day. As opposed to the vegetables where the carbohydrate content that we talked, or as opposed to the vegetables that we talked about on the plate balancing kind of pie chart, those are more geared towards fiber, and they're very typically lower in carbohydrates compared to some of these like things that you'll see here. So I just want to make that quick distinction in case there's some confusion there. But other things that are super helpful and super, healthy are things like beans, lentils, and quinoa. And again, we want to make sure that when we're measuring these things out, we want to use the cooked form, especially with some of the grains, because they will kind of grow in size after they're cooked. So our fat, as if you remember from the portion control slide with the hands, is the smallest amount. And that's because, per their serving, they contain a lot of calories to them. So it doesn't take a lot for them to have a lot of calories. That's why peanut butter, as an example, you don't, the serving size is very small, probably compared to what a lot of us eat on a day-to-day basis if you do peanut butter. So I know I definitely overeat on that one. But some common and healthy fat choices that I would recommend olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, nuts, some full fat dairy products, and some like dry aged cheeses could be good snacks as well. But ultimately, with our fats, a lot of this times we're using them with cooking, such as when we're using it in the pan or using it as some type of sauce or something like that. So we want to be mindful of where a lot of these things are coming in. And when it comes to things like nuts, as healthy as they are, again, because they have a lot of calories, because they're a high fat source, we want to be mindful of not just mindlessly popping them, into our mouth like we would with maybe like potato chips, for example. So we want to make sure that we're just being aware of the fact that um, less might be more with something like nuts, so we don't unintentionally overshoot the calories that we're trying to take in. So as an example, using the image that's there on the right, we'll kind of call this about a palm size of chicken. At least I think that's chicken. Yes. I don't know if it was chicken or fish as I looked at it. So we have about a palm size of chicken, which we could assume is about maybe 20 to 30 grams. We have a portion of vegetables taking a good amount of the plate. Then we can assume that's going to give us maybe about 3 to 5 grams of fiber. We have our carbohydrate underneath the chicken, so that quinoa, again, maybe thinking about anywhere from 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrates, possibly more, depending on what it is that you're having. And then lastly, if I was making a meal like this, we would use probably butter or olive oil in the pan, and we would consider that to be our main fat source. If we wanted to maybe add a fat source to this, maybe we can put some avocado with the chicken or something like that. But this is a good representation of how all this comes together. So here's some final thoughts and some bonuses. So ultimately, all of this should help you better understand how to build a plate in any situation. Again, we're looking at the types of food. We're looking at what's a vegetable source I can put together, what's a protein source I can throw on there. Do I have the desire to have some kind of starchy carbohydrate, such as maybe rice or potatoes? And do I want to have some fat on there, such as some olive oil or maybe some butter or some nuts on the side. And with this type of, I'll call this meal building and meal planning, if you will, it gives you a better opportunity and more flexibility to go ahead and put something together out of nothing. If you look in the fridge and you only have a handful of items, I'm sure by using this as a reference, you can put something together and probably hit pretty close to your macronutrient targets if you're following them so that you can stay on track with your goals in any situation. Like I said, I like the hand portion method. I think it's a good starting place for a lot of people, especially for those that are trying to become more aware and for those that maybe don't want to do as much tracking with numbers. Um, and this is just a great starting point to really just kind of recenter yourself and just clean up your nutrition so that it better aligns with what you're trying to accomplish as we not only head into the holiday season, but also hit the ground running as we start the new year. And the new year starts, in almost a little bit more than 5 weeks. So a couple other things here. If you haven't already downloaded or seen any of it, you can go ahead and click the link that's going to be in the PowerPoint slides that I'm going to send you, and that's going to be a shopping guide. There's also a little bit more detail about some of this stuff in a seminar I did a few months back. And then, if you haven't checked out some of the sample meals I sent you guys a little while ago, you can go ahead and click that as well. So, I mean, at this point, if you're receiving this, you know who I am and you know where to find me. But if you guys have questions, either if you're seeing me in the next couple of days or next week, you don't want to wait till then, just shoot me a text and then we'll go over any questions you have. So keep an eye out for these things. Like I said, I'm going to try to be dropping these every Wednesday. Feel free to use them. They're there for you to use. I know additional cost to you guys, but like I said, my goal is to give you more resources and more things to use to help you along the way in your own personal health and fitness journeys.